welcome to this Azuro sponsored webinar on how modern tools can help you and your business save money and reduce risk using RPA. My name is Ryan Purvis. I'm a CIO at Hylo Maritime Risk, a customer of Azuro Solutions. And with me, I have Johan Ungera and Anthony Simons from Azuro. Gents, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
Hi, good morning. It's actually afternoon. So I'm Johan Ungera. I run Azuro. We have some offices in South Africa, in the UK, and in the US. Yeah, we're a Microsoft Gold partner. We've been around for about 10, 11 years, and we really like solving all these interesting problems. Anthony, over to you.
Thanks, Johan. Afternoon. My name is Anthony Simons. I'm a technical lead in the business applications space at Azuro. Quite a bit of experience customizing, configuring Dynamics 365, as well as using the Microsoft Power Platform to automate processes and for rapid application development. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Anthony. So just to go through what our sort of agenda is, we will run through some common questions and clarifications around RPA, and then Anthony will do a demonstration of how RPA can work for a specific scenario, and then if there's any questions, we'll cover those off at the end. So Johan, I'll start off with you. How would you explain RPA to someone that's not technically not with a technical background?
Thanks, Ryan. So RPA stands for Robotic Process Automation, and it is a software technology that automates repetitive tasks. So if you remember, once upon a time we used Excel a lot, and we had these macros that you could record in Excel to record your clicks and to repeat those common tasks that you did in Excel. RPA is a similar thing, but just a little bit on steroids. So we can read a document, a PDF document, and infer information from that, and then input that information into a desktop application that is running on your local computer. So and in those processes can be chained together, and workflows can be run, etc. So really powerful technology.
And who's this aimed at? Is it aimed for a developer to work with, or is it more aimed at the business to start automating their own flows?
So it is primarily aimed at the business unit, or business user. The tools are set up in such a way that they can be used from a visual design canvas. You create your workflows visually, so there's no code involved in many of these activities, including building out your document readers and using some of the AI technologies. There are end user tools for all of these capabilities. So again, very accessible and really aimed at that sort of power user. But definitely, if you're comfortable in Excel and you've made it and you've created a few more interesting spreadsheets, then the leap towards RPA and using that Power Automate platform is not such a great leap.
And why do you think RPA is now coming to the fore?
So I'll just do that. So I think the big reason why RPA is becoming more accessible and more available is just there's a lot of vendors in the space. So there's quite a lot of options available. There's a lot of capability, and a lot of the technology has really matured. Again, we look at things like the AI technology that's made it possible to read documents and really understand different types of documents. So if you think about an invoice, invoices are very similar, but they're not the same. And so if you've got 2 or 3 different vendors sending you invoices, those invoices would be able to be read by the same RPA process with a little bit of training. So really, I think it's the combination of a number of players in the space and the technology that's finally mature enough that it actually is accessible to general usage.
Yeah, I mean, I had personal experience with building some workflows recently, and it was substantially quicker to build using Power Automate than it would have been to write the code to automate the process. Is there a benefit to using these tools for a business user that you would call out?
So Certainly, I think there's many benefits. Obviously, there's a cost saving benefit in that you can now get repetitive tasks performed by a machine. That leads to an increase in efficiency. We see an improved data quality, which again gives you better reporting capabilities. And once you start using the technology, you see many other opportunities and ways in which you can improve your business with it. Although there's this fear that the robot is going to come and take over my job, the inverse of that is true, that the robot is taking away all of these repetitive tasks. So it creates an improved company culture. And you know, the business now and the person who used to do this repetitive task has an opportunity to spend their time on more valuable activities and on more meaningful activities, as opposed to capturing an invoice, for example. There's also reduced the risk in, again, error handling, etc. And then enhanced customer experience, because the turnaround on many of these processes has become much quicker because of the automation involved in it. And of course, you know, this is the way of the future. We're living in a pandemic or post-pandemic world, and these technologies are going to future-proof your business. So there's many good reasons to adopt them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you sort of alluded to is that people get tired, and when they get tired, they make mistakes, and they don't work 24/7. Whereas, you know, an RPA process can work anytime and on demand. So if you were to speak to a customer now who's trying to embark on this journey, what sort of questions would you ask them, and how would they decide they were ready for this type of engagement?
I think where we would start is obviously identifying the processes that make sense to automate, and that would be, again, looking at those low-hanging fruit of many menial tasks, even in our own business, where we have repeat invoicing that goes out, the same invoice every month for certain types of licensing. So an activity like that is a prime candidate for an RPA process. And from there, we would look at what are the tools that the customer is using today. So is this an old legacy application? So is it an accounting package like a QuickBooks, etc.? And therefore, does it require manual capturing to be done, and not a modern application that has an API? And if those conditions are met, then, you know, it's a good candidate for an RPA process.
Sorry, I just want to ask you a quick question. Is this actually recording?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I just I looked at my status bar and I didn't see the record button moving, and I was like, oh no, just talked 10 minutes and we haven't recorded it. Need some RPA for that too.
Yes, indeed.
So one of the things we've discussed, and I mean, you obviously helped me with the recent RPA process where we were querying data from another system, and it was for our users to get the data into Excel spreadsheets so they could get it whenever they wanted without, you know, sort of, you know, asking our development team to keep pulling the data for them. Part of that required a little bit of code, and that was to deal with the APIs. Is this completely a no-code or a low-code solution, or do you still think there's a role for the business working tighter with developers to solve the problem?
Very much so. I mean, I think there's definitely a synergy that's forming between business and developers, and the term that's being coined are hybrid teams, where you've got citizen developers creating low code and no code processes, and certain of the more still developer centric processes being handled by a traditional developer. But the relationship, I believe, is changing. You know, back in the day, and I've got some grey hair, so I've been around this game for a while. You know, we used to write things in COBOL, and the business would write you a spec, and then you would sit in front of your cubicle and your dumb terminal and write all this COBOL code, and then hopefully you got something right, and there's a bit of testing that happens. So there's now the shift where we work closer together, we collaborate through technologies like Teams and Zoom, and business and technical teams have to work a lot closer, because the pace of business means that we can't wait for a big lengthy speccing process. And when the business user comes around and says, well, I'd really like to integrate to that API, as Ryan mentioned, then for us from a technical perspective to quickly plug in just that little piece and not have to write all of the other logic, the business unit remains in control of the rest of the logic, and we're just fitting in a small module. Makes, again, that synergy great and creates a lot of value quickly.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of leads us into the shadow IT world, where a line of business can be building a whole bunch of processes that I don't want to say house of cards, but there's a realization that if you're building things that are connecting to APIs and other applications, if any of those things change, those processes need to change too. So do you have advice around managing that with a governance framework?
Absolutely. I think as your almost the state of citizen applications starts growing, the governance becomes far more important. Again, if you go back to the more pure dev disciplines, we have source control applications, etc., to maintain versioning and a better control on those topics. So when your environment becomes sufficiently complex, and I think that's always the challenge, is when is that point, it becomes necessary to create sandbox environments where you can create and train and test different experiences, whilst in the production environment having a bit more of a controlled release cycle, and just slow things down a little bit to make sure that you don't disrupt normal business processes accidentally.
Yeah, I've got a question here. How long does it take to build a process?
I guess how long is a piece of string, really? The tools are very intuitive. So if you have an idea of what your process actually looks like, it can go quite quickly. And again, I suppose because my background is a little bit more pure dev, I tend to draw my little flow chart out before I actually design it on the Power Automate canvas. But it is, because it's such a visual tool, you can actually kind of design and build your process as you go along on the canvas itself. I find just having a bit of an idea and a little bit of a process flow drawn out with some boxes and diamonds gives you that step up to speed it up. But you can build a process in a day, or less than that, depending on the kind of process you're building.
Yeah, look, I mean, I built our leave process in a day, which is very basic. It uses SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, and the guys can book their leave through a Teams bot. And that gets, I can approve it, and that's in the SharePoint list. And that took me maybe not even a day, a couple hours between meetings and the rest of it. So it depends on how complicated it is, I guess. The other question that I just seen pop up is there a difference between having a cloud RPA process or a desktop RPA process?
RPA, strictly speaking, refers more to the desktop processes. But again, because the technologies kind of integrate and take hands, and those workflow processes tie into each other, there's theoretically, I guess there's not a big difference, but the difference between theory and practice. In practice, from a desktop application perspective, there needs to be somewhere for that desktop application to execute, whereas the cloud process is executed by the cloud host. So normally you would have a virtual machine environment or something deployed. In the demo that Anthony's going to show us in a little bit, is running all of those processes on his local laptop. But there would need to be a little bit of extra infrastructure or deployed environment for the RPA process to execute, especially if you're intending it to be an unattended process, so a process that actually runs without any intervention.
Yeah, when I worked with a bank, and what we did is we built a whole lot of VMs, virtual machines, that were basically users working on the applications, but they were actually robot process automations, and they were handling the data capture between two systems, and they were taking data from the one system and capturing the other system. And that required a physical machine, because that's what the software that we're using was designed to run that way. So do you think there's a need for the applications that you're going to work with as part of the RPA process to be ready for RPA, or do you think it depends, you sort of case by case it?
Again, and the RPA tooling is really powerful. So I guess depending on the RPA toolset that you choose, there may be some limitations, but certainly within the Power Automate RPA environment, you literally can use any application. The application that we're going to demonstrate is our old accounting application, and it was updated in 2018 the last time. It's built to run on a local machine. It has no cloud awareness. The only thing it knows about Microsoft is that it runs on Windows and a SQL database on the back end, and that's as much as it knows about Microsoft. So there's no hook from this application back to RPA. The application is being driven purely as a screen recorded macro kind of a process.
I think it's a good opportunity now to maybe take us into a demo so people can see what we've been talking about. Johan, do you want to explain the demo that we're going to be seeing?
Let me do that quickly. So from the process that I've got on the screen here, the demo that we're showing is very simple. So we didn't want to try and overcomplicate things and get too creative. But in short, the RPA process is monitoring a mailbox. It happens to be Anthony's mailbox again today for the purposes of a demo. And it checks then if the email that's received is in fact an invoice. And if it is an invoice, then it parses that invoice. So it extracts the invoice document from the email, passes it into a bit of AI that actually extracts the information out of the document and then feeds that information into a desktop process that opens up our application, our accounting application, and captures the information in that invoice into the accounting application before closing the application again. So this will, in this instance, ensure that we're capturing to the correct company and all of those kind of things. So I'm going to hand this over to Anthony. And then Anthony, I think you can just share your screen when you're ready.
Okay, so this is my desktop. As Johan mentioned, I'm going to send myself an invoice. I just create a new email, send the email to myself. The process that we built using Power Automate in the cloud will actually search my inbox for the subject line invoice. It'll then prompt me in Microsoft Teams. It'll actually extract the the details of the invoice and prompt me in Microsoft Teams. I can either approve or reject or process the invoice manually. And once I approve, it'll then call the desktop application, the Power Automate desktop process, and it'll process the invoice automatically in our accounting package. So I'm just going to send myself an invoice. Close that. As soon as the email is received, you should see a prompt in Microsoft Teams.
You asked it to do not disturb, so would that make a difference?
It shouldn't, Ryan, but let's just see quickly. Give it a moment or two.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay, excellent. I see it didn't actually prompt on my desktop, but the message was received in Teams. So it's extracted the details from the invoice number, the amount, customer details, and I can either approve, reject, or process this manually. I'm going to just approve it. And once approved, it does take a few seconds to run, but it'll open up our accounting application and process that automatically. So again, it calls the process flow in Power Automate on the cloud, which then calls the desktop application. It does take about 30 seconds or so to run. It should launch in a moment or two.
Give us, while we wait for that to happen, give us an indication of how long it took you to get this working and some of the challenges that you had?
It didn't take too long, Ryan. We used the AI builder to extract the contents of the email. So we just had to build an AI model. Of course, build the process as well on Power Automate Desktop. We actually used a SQL query to match the stock code to the part number. It took a few days. It wasn't too complex.
And just to confirm, all the stuff that's happening on your screen right now, that's happening with the RPA process. You're not actually touching the screen.
That's correct, 100%. And
you should have your hands up so we can see that.
Yeah, processed automatically. We can run through that again if we.
I think it would be good to now have the tools open. So, for example, have the flow on the web maybe, and the desktop piece as well.
Sure, right. So I'll just open up the AI model. So what that actually does, we can upload various documents. It'll scan those documents, and then we can tag them with the different variables for the invoice number, the customer ID, the stock code. We then use that AI model in a Cloudflow, and show you, it'll actually post to Microsoft Teams, a choice of options in Microsoft Teams, and then it'll call that process flow we built with Power Automate Desktop. And just to show you highlights, so this is the process flow in Power Automate Desktop. It runs the application, actually signs in as a user, then steps through various processes. As I mentioned, it runs a SQL query to match the stock code as part number, and then processes the invoice.
I think one of the key things to point out here is those click UI elements. So like line number 8 and line number 9, that's actually clicking places in the application. So you can almost train your process based on how your application looks. And to the point that I made earlier about if applications change, you might need to change your process to fit that. Excellent.
You can actually notice the variables as well. So we actually use those variables in the process, and it just passes that information using the AI model.
And maybe just the last point on this particular screen, which looks very complicated and a bit intimidating. This was all recorded using a screen recording mechanism. You opened the application and taught the RPA how to navigate it. By actually clicking in the screen.
That's a very good point, because I hadn't actually thought about that. So there's actually no real, you don't need to be an expert on the application you're using. All you have to do is use it once and make sure it's done. And that sets up these items here.
Yes.
Excellent. So what would you say, going back to sort of the approach, how do you decide whether it's going to be a desktop RPA versus a cloud RPA?
We're going the wrong person in the view. I think, Ryan, to answer that question, the biggest question is really whether your application that you need to automate is available as a cloud application or has some way for a cloud process to interact with it. So again, going back to the application we chose for this demo, it's an on-premise desktop-based accounting application. So you could use RPA for something like filling in a spreadsheet, although you could do that with cloud-based RPA as well, because the Excel tools are cloud available. So you could use it for things like SAP. That's being used quite often in processes like SAP, where Excel spreadsheets are being captured, part codes are being processed. So you've got a supplier sending you a product list, and this is coming in via an email in a Excel spreadsheet and you need to update your price list on your on-premise application. So instead of now having complicated processes that developers have to use, you could actually extract that Excel spreadsheet and then using the RPA tool, capture it into your stock control application, which is sitting on the stock controller's desktop.
Fantastic. So as part of this webinar, we also do a free 1-hour assessment. How would someone get in contact with Azuro to have that booked in?
We would we have a bookings.com or office bookings link, which we'll then share, I think, with everyone in the webinar so that they can schedule their assessment.
Fantastic. Is there anything that either of you want to give as closing thoughts?
I think from my side, the thing that stands out for me is just that we've got so many tools available to us and so many ways to improve our way of work, and it's almost becoming difficult to choose which ones we want to use. The exciting part here is that I'm a very technical. I've got a very deep technical background, and I see tools like these, and what excites me about them is that it makes it possible for us to really focus on the nitty-gritty difficult problems to solve, and the problems that you spend a lot of time on that don't add a lot of value, which is really translating a business user's process into a bunch of code, is now taken away, and the business user can describe their own process and they can modify their process, and the process can evolve with the business at a much quicker pace, versus in the old days where it was this lengthy, long turnaround times, and 6 months later the business has evolved and the code is finally written and it's no longer relevant. So I think that's the value that we really see in applications like these.
Yeah, and I think it's important there to have a partner that helps you. Your business can get away with quite a lot themselves, but at some point they're going to need help with the extra steps, the complications, the APIs, the application integrations. Excellent. Anthony, any closing thoughts from your side, or all good?
I'm fine, Ryan. Thanks.
Super. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for an excellent conversation and the demo, and I hope that everyone found this useful.
Thanks very much, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.